Lots of people with fleets don't understand how to manage the fleet the right way. So what we're going to do today is catch up with an expert in this industry and see what he's got to say about managing fleets, no matter if they're small or if they're large. So let's go check it out. All right, so I'm here with Paul Oliver from Fleet Advisory. So we're going to catch up with Paul, find out a little bit more about fleet and see if we can unpack how this looks and how it is relevant for most people with a small to medium sort of fleet size. So Paul, tell us a bit of background on yourself. How did you get in the industry?
Well, it's been a while, about 26 years, Stuart, so about 20 years with two different fleet management organisations, 3 years in retail in a multi-franchise dealership, another 2 years working in as National Manager of Fleet for an OEM, and about a year or so effectively as a consultant. Sales, customer service, process improvement, operations, product development. It's given me a pretty comprehensive sort of background, I'd like to think.
So you've got a big broad scope and there's lots to do with the running of fleets and the organisation side of things. So that's pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I like to think so anyway.
So for anyone looking at a fleet advisor like yourself, why would it be important? Why would even someone with a fleet of, say, 10 cars or 10 drivers be important to have an advisor on board?
I've actually done some work on a 10-car fleet just recently. The reality is I think it comes into three main reasons. First, inevitably, is cost. I mean, the cost of running a motor vehicle fleet tends to be, depending on the type of organisation, in the top 5 expenses of any business, whether it be a small to medium business, a large business, a not-for-profit organisation, or even a government entity. Cost is a big component. I think the second, realistically, are the risk management and compliance related issues that have really increased in recent years. I'm talking principally around work health and safety, the obligation obviously to provide a safe workplace, which includes a motor vehicle, but then also we cross over into aspects of chain of responsibility. And I think the third probably is just the unprecedented level of change that the industry is going through now. There are levels of technology which are available, whether it be in vehicle management systems, whether it be putting in a mobile app with your driver, talking about pooling systems, and then there's alternatives effectively to fleet vehicles as well these days, substitutes or complementary to the fleet in terms of vehicle subscription, ride sharing. The industry is undergoing a lot of change, and you've got to be able to choose from the best combination to get the right package for your particular fleet. Like things like vehicle subscription, I've mentioned that a couple of times to friends, and they, what's that? I mean, there are, unless you're involved and keeping up to date with what's happening, there are a lot of circumstances where you just wouldn't have that information available to you. Any business can actually leverage through a consultant such as myself the experience that they've had, but also what else is in the network. I mean, I reach out to specialists whether it be driver training, whether it be fuel purchases. I mean, I deal with somebody who's got 30 years experience in the oil industry when it comes to really negotiating the best possible options on fuel purchasing. So I'd have to say I'm averaging at this stage about 5 to 1 in terms of the savings that I'm able to bring to an organisation versus the fees that I actually charge, just the way it averages out. And that doesn't really differ, with the size of the organisation. Because again, when you look at the overall motor vehicle costs, they really add up in all.
So would you say a lot of that is data driven?
Yeah, I think often I go into an assignment with people having a view of what they'd like me to do, and then they find me going off in another direction. And that's because when I get the data, and sometimes we have to go looking and have that put together, I start looking at various aspects that they're sort of wondering why I'm looking at them. But you look at utilisation, a key driver of cost, obviously, and challenging the utilisation of any vehicle in the fleet. We look at do a safety assessment. Look at fuel consumption, fuel costs, all of those sorts of things. So there is actually a lot of analysis. You tend to start with people providing with an Excel spreadsheet with a few details of their vehicles. Often, it's pretty difficult to put together. You don't always know the details of, when the vehicle, was purchased, or how old it was, or what variant it is, and
so you wake up in the middle of the night with these numbers flashing through your head.
Yep, I do a lot of Excel and a lot of colour coding. But what comes through from doing all this analysis is then it starts to produce the picture of where the opportunities are, where the risks are as well, and actually then it's a case of just documenting that in a consulting report for the organisation and being able to make recommendations. That is a lot of it's data driven. You're right.
So with that, I would imagine that a company with, say, a fleet of 10 may not necessarily have the resources to spare to be able to do that kind of number crunching. Not only that, they don't have the expertise either.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely right. And the reality is, sometimes with those small fleets, in the first first hour, sitting there having a conversation with them and going through them data, I can latch on to some low hanging fruit. Pretty well straight away.
Key drivers that are going to make a
correct.
difference.
I mean, a larger organisation, may take a couple of weeks. Obviously, not going to take a couple of weeks with a small to medium, sort of fleet. The other thing, of course, is in some circumstances, having identified those initial savings, sometimes the fleets just want to keep me on to basically keep working with them to keep an eye on a regular basis. Doesn't have to then be the same level of commitment, but to overview and keep things on track going forward. Correct. Yeah. Make sure that the cost savings are sustained going forward.
What sort of horror stories have you seen in relation to what people are doing with their fleets?
I sometimes see organisations putting forward a safety culture. Even going to the expense of taking out telematics systems, in-vehicle management systems, and as a result of that, you get some great data, some great insights as to to driver behaviour. I think it's really important at that point in time to actually do something with it, and I've seen data coming through of some significant speeding events, some real concerns about the behaviour of certain drivers, and then it's a case of, well, what do you do with that information? You've paid the money, you've identified the problem, you've got to do something with it, both from an organisation perspective, but also from the point of view of the driver. So, whether that be simply providing feedback in a constructive way that meets the needs of the organisation, but also takes into account the safety of the driver, or again, where it comes down to I guess more specialised meeting of the needs in terms of driver training. So actually identifying, well, this is the problem we're having, whether it be speed, whether it be distance in terms of not allowing sufficient braking distance. You might have accident damage that's come through. That sort of you've got a constant hit the rear of another car. Those sorts of things obviously can be addressed. And obviously, with somebody like yourself that can actually then tailor a program to address that behaviour. If you go to the expense, if you put forward, you've got a safety culture, you've got to close the loop, is the way I like to think about it, and do something with the data that you've now got. You've got the insights, do something with it.
Well, you can certainly see how, when you've got data there that's sort of reflecting badly on a person or the way they're behaving, and it has real impact potentially on your brand. Also, your work health and safety obligations. You're now aware of a risk. What are you doing about it? You're taking those next steps to actually mitigate that risk by counselling that driver or assessing them. I mean, I've done hundreds of driver assessments where I sat next to people and came back with some recommendations and actually even tuned their driving up to fix those issues. So there's certainly remedial things that you can do when a driver is displaying those sorts of things, but not acting on it, that is a bit of a concern.
Yeah, it's one I've never really understood, I
Yeah.
guess, to a certain extent. I think sometimes it just comes down to capacity.
Yeah.
But again, when you look
Again,
at the...
they're stretched.
Yep, exactly right.
Yeah.
And you look in the investment made, but again, you've got to continue that investment through with your drivers, because
We've
that is
seen-
the commitment to safety, and there
Yeah.
is a risk
Yeah.
associated with the legislation, and there are there are pros and cons here. Obviously,
Well, we've
you have
seen
to follow
whole
it through.
businesses destroyed by people who haven't acted on, safety concerns, for sure. So, Paul, what are the common mistakes you find that fleets are making?
Yeah, look, I think the most obvious one is probably sometimes just concentrating on the purchase cost of the vehicle to drive down your cost. So, the lower the purchase price that's going to be the best vehicle for us. The reality is that you need to look at it more holistically, a total cost of ownership or a whole of life cost. It takes into account not only the acquisition costs, but the maintenance costs of the vehicle, the fuel consumption, obviously, of the vehicle, and importantly, the resale value. So,
Also, the finance potentially on that vehicle too.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. So that's the really important key driver of managing a motor vehicle fleet in terms of cost. I guess part of the benefit of being a supplier, accredited supplier with Australasian Fleet Managers Association. I know you are as well. We have access to a whole of life cost calculator, which is quite comprehensive, and again is sometimes quite surprising, the results that we're able to reveal to people that are probably concentrating only on one factor, being purchase price. Look at resale value as a key indicator, fuel consumption. You see it now with hybrids sort of coming to the fore as well, in terms of whilst their cost might be another $3,000 more, the reality is now that they're coming in as being more favourable in some circumstances to their petrol equivalents when you look at a whole of life cost basis.
And that would depend on the amount of mileage you're doing, the
Yes.
amount of driving you're doing, the type of driving you're doing. So all that stuff's really important to actually get out on the table to start with when you're working with them, so you can get an idea of what the costs are going to be.
The figures are going to look completely different on a vehicle that's doing 10,000 k's a year to one that's doing 30,000 k's a year, and you have to take those things into account. A lot of people will finance their vehicles in the same way, but the reality is that they're behaving very differently in terms of their usage. The end result will be very different as well.
How do people find you? So if someone wants to get in touch with Paul Oliver and get you to have a look at their fleet, any special offers for them or anything like that?
So the best way to find me is probably just go to the website, fleetadvisory.com.au.
We'll stick that in the little comment box at the bottom there.
Yep, sounds good. Email us is paul@fleetadvisory.com.au. And from my perspective, I'm always happy to sit down with a fleet, spend a couple of hours having a look at the data and do an initial assessment. There's no charge for that, and actually see whether I can add a benefit.
So you'll actually look at someone's fleet for them and give them an overview with no cost.
Yep, absolutely.
How could you argue with that?
The reality is, if I can demonstrate savings, then there's an opportunity for me to do work for them.
Just on
If
that,
not-
what are some of the savings that you've been able to come up with? I mean, you're saying 5 to 1. Is there any examples that you could sort of pluck out of the air that you would think might be relevant?
Certainly, utilisation of vehicles where you might be paying for a lease and actually not utilising the annual kilometres travelled that you're being allowed. It's a key component of driver cost, and surprisingly, not everybody gets involved in managing those things after the lease has been set up, like a set and forget type scenario. There's an opportunity there. Fuel, there are lots of different fuel offers out there. There are a number of companies that are on fuel offers that don't give them much of a saving. There's so many different components with fleet. That's the thing, and then that's just on the cost side.
So
of
really,
things
this is
as
just the tip of the iceberg. Once you delve into it, the bigger the fleet, obviously the greater leverage of savings. But don't discount the fact that a small fleet could actually be saving money by having a proper management approach to it.
Yeah, that's right, and maintenance is a big one as well. You know, people acquire a vehicle and they put it on the road, and then they just accept that, you know, what it's costing in terms of maintenance is
Tyres, fuel, brakes,
exactly
you
right,
know, all that stuff.
But you know, the reality is that, you know, a vehicle's also going to get to a point with its age in kilometres where it's probably not as cost effective as a new one.
Time to get rid of it.
Correct. So again, there are savings there. You can sometimes look at, you could have a new vehicle for what it's costing you to have a vehicle on the road at the moment. Financing methods as well. You know, what's most cost effective for cash flow.
What would you say to someone who had a fleet of vehicles that had vehicles over 5 years of age in that fleet? Is that starting to be an area where they need to start thinking about it?
Depending on the type of vehicle, and you know, passenger vehicles, I guess you probably want to have a closer look, and it gets to the point where, you know, vehicles, in terms of what they're costing and the amount of time off the road, you know, on maintenance, you can often be better off, you know, taking a new vehicle, turning it over at a time where you're still going to get reasonable resale value, and actually moving into a new one. Like commercial vehicles, probably, you know, trucks as well, tend to have a greater effective life. But the reality is, you need to be having a close look at that. There is, particularly in small to medium fleets, a view that we'll just run these things till they drop. Sometimes that can be okay, but we've got to look at a range of factors. What's it costing to keep on the road? How is it being utilised? Safety is a key factor as well. I mean,
and also image. How does the thing look? Is it, you know, your brand running around on a vehicle that looks beaten up, and you know, really shouldn't be representing what you stand for? And people do pay attention.
Yeah, branding is a big. I mean, if you've got a vehicle that's sign written, and there's you know, there are benefits to having a vehicle sign written in terms of the marketing potential. That,
taxation as well.
Yeah, exactly right. So the reality is that there are benefits to that, but you've also got to have an image which is in fitting with, you know, your brand that you've got on the side of the car.
Paul, thank you so much. Great to catch up with Paul and find a lot more out about fleet and where the fleet advisory sort of role comes into play. This is just the tip of the iceberg. So if you want to get in touch with Paul, details will be in the comment box down below. Don't forget to give the video a like and also subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Thanks. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Peace, Paul.